Good morning, everyone. Okay, now I'm seeing lots of attendees are right now starting to coming in. So welcome to the first TEFL program from Chulalongkorn University's webinar series 1 sessions. This webinar is organized by the Teaching English as a Foreign Language program, Faculty of Education, Chulalongkorn University. So welcome everyone. So if you want to say hi, please do so at the chat box right here. So let's see, where are you from? Hello from Indonesia. Selamat pagi. Hi, how are you? Hi, สวัสดีครับอาจารย์ อาจารย์ from พิษณุโลก. Hi Kyle, how are you? Okay, and good morning from Cooley. Very nice, thank you for your support. So good morning, everybody. So it's so nice to see you all. And this is our very first webinar session from TEFL program. Thank you so much for being here. We got lots and lots of registrations. As a matter of fact, we oversubscribed. So you're now very, very lucky to listen to the talk from Professor Paul Nations here with us. So let's see. Okay, from Cambodia, hello, how are you? From Udon Thani, hello. Southern Philippines, hi. Hello, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for joining this webinar. And we are so excited for this very first webinar. And we have our special speaker here, our Professor Paul Nation. So let's see who else. So right now we have about 146 attendees now from UK. Hello, Swadika. Nice to see you all. Philippines, good morning. From Secondacon as well, Swadika, everyone. Wow. So now this is so nice with the technology. We can host this webinar and we can attract all people from over the world who love learning about vocabulary, about language. And here at TEFL program from Chulalongkorn University, we're here to provide you this wonderful webinar talks right here. So I think once we have about 200, we can start. So give me about 5 minutes. So we'll start about 10 past 10. So hi from Indonesia, lots and lots of our guests, our attendee from Indonesia and Philippines, and of course from Thailand too. Thank you so much. Excellent. Okay, from UK, Cambodia. Thank you. Very good. So now people start, continuing just coming in. So what time is it there at Philippines and Indonesia and Cambodia? Let's have a little chit chat. Okay, today is at 11:05 from Philippines. Thank you very much. 11:04. Great. And 11. Very nice. 10. Okay, from UK it's 4 a.m. Well, thank you so much for staying up for this webinar. Okay, all right. So let us start now. Welcome to the first Chulalongkorn TEFL program webinar series 1, and organized by the Teaching English as a Foreign Language program, Faculty of Education, Chulalongkorn University. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Chanukrit Tiengalaya, but you can call me in short, OAT, O-A-T, OAT, just like oatmeal. And I will be your host and your moderator for today's webinar session. And as you may notice that you received the link for this webinar from LITU, or Language Institute of Thammasat University. We want to say thank you so much, LITU, for your generous help in providing us with this platform to accommodate our larger than usual audience for this webinar. LITU, we are very grateful for this collaboration with the Chula TEFL program. So let's see. Okay, let me start by sharing this. And I'm gonna put on the play mode. Now, can you see the slide? Yes, okay, great. And we wanna make an announcement. Yesterday, we launched the TEFL Chulalongkorn channel on YouTube. So right here. So please make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share. We have posted. If you missed yesterday's webinar, it's now available over there on our channel. And we will continually post all the webinar, especially the past series, so that you can watch our past webinar here. So great. All right. And today we're here for the webinar titled What Matters in Vocabulary Learning from Emeritus Professor Paul Nation. Very good. But before we formally have these webinar sessions, I have some reminders. Number one, so as you already did, so you already registered your name, so it's for us to conveniently monitor your attendance. Number two, if you have questions, then you can see that we have these Q&A features right there on the tools bar. You can type your questions right there, okay? And for the chat, you can add some comments. And next, right after this webinar, you can use the evaluation link or the evaluation QR code to give us some feedback so that we can provide the best for you for your next sessions. And last but not least, please enjoy this webinar. So next, I would like to invite the director of TEFL program, Faculty of Education, Chulalongkorn University, Assistant Professor Dr. Ponnpimol Sukhawati, to have the opening speech. And she is kindly prepared the opening speech in the very interesting clip. So please enjoy.
Hi everyone. As we are facing coronavirus pandemic crisis as the global issue, and never before have we encountered educational disruption on such a scale. The educators around the world are looking for the best practice to ensure that learning never stops. TEFL webinar series is taking innovative actions to unlock solutions to respond to the situation, and we are trying to find means to support learners and teachers to keep on provisioning education at distance. In times like this, I'd like to express my appreciation to all educators in ELT who never give up on sharing knowledge to our learning community. Without their contributions, this project might not be possible. Moreover, I'd like to thank my colleagues, the TEFL committees, and the TEFL student team from the Faculty of Education for making the event happen. Distance never matters in education, and learning is lifelong. Welcome to our TEFL webinar series on Zoom.
Thank you very much, Assistant Professor Dr. Ponnpimol Sukhawati, for your opening remarks. Okay, so vocabulary is inevitably one of the essential pillars of language learners. Being able to acquire vocabulary stems from various exposures, such as extensive reading, extensive listening, and learning vocabulary deliberately in the classroom. But why does it matter? Today, we are honored to have an international scholar in the field of vocabulary, Professor Paul Nation, here with us to give us a talk on what matters in vocabulary learning. Professor Paul Nation is the world expert who is best known for his Four Strands principle. He teaches at the School of Linguistic and Applied Language Studies at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. He has taught in many countries all over the world, including Thailand, Indonesia, Finland, and Japan. His special interests are language teaching methodology and vocabulary learning and teaching. So, without any further ado, it's an honor to present Professor Paul Nation. Welcome, Professor Paul Nation. สวัสดีครับ
Okay, so
I will stop sharing. Yes.
We're in business. Is that right or not?
Yes, that's right. It's all yours.
Good. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about what matters in vocabulary learning. And I'm going to ignore lots of things which do matter, such as motivation and time spent on learning and all of that sort of thing, to get down to what I think are the two essential features for vocabulary learning. I also think that these features are pretty important for other kinds of learning as well, but I'm going to stick to vocabulary today. Now, the two things that matter in vocabulary learning are repetition and the quality of meeting with words. So that means it's important, if we want to learn words, that we have the opportunity to meet them several times. And quality of the meetings means when we do meet the words, it's helpful if we meet them in ways which help them stick in our memory. And so what I'm going to do today is to look at these two features in detail, repetition and the quality of meetings. And then I'm going to conclude with some general guidelines that apply to any language teaching program, which will increase the amount of repetition and which will increase the quality of meetings with vocabulary. So let's start with repetition. Okay. So we can classify repetition in two sorts of ways. One way refers to the kind of repetition that occurs. Verbatim repetition means you repeat exactly what was met or said before. So verbatim means copying exactly. And varied repetition means meeting again, but meeting in a slightly or rather different way from how something has been met before. Both of these kinds of repetition are important. And when we look at the guidelines later, we'll see that there are different ways of ensuring verbatim repetition and ensuring varied repetition. Another way of looking at repetition is to see when the repetition occurs. So immediate repetition is repetition which occurs within a minute or two or a few minutes of the first occurrence of the item. And so you could, within a few minutes, you could have a lot of immediate repetitions. The other kind of repetition is delayed repetition. And that means that we meet something and then a few hours later, or an hour later, or a day later, or a week later, we meet it again. And so this is a delayed repetition. The research on immediate and delayed repetition is very clear. If you want something to stay in your memory, then delayed repetition is the best kind of repetition. However, immediate repetition is also useful for developing fluency and also for developing a strong awareness of the form or the meaning of a particular item so that it has a chance of being recalled in later meetings. So then these are the two kinds of factors affecting repetition. Whether the repetition is an exact copy of what you've met before, verbatim repetition, or whether it's slightly different from what you've met before. Immediate repetition and delayed repetition talk about the timing of the repetitions. Both repetitions are useful, kinds of repetition are useful, but delayed repetition is by far the most effective. Okay, so when we do repetition, there are lots of teaching activities and techniques that we can use. Let's look at some examples of immediate verbatim repetition. So that's repetition which goes in the box in the top left empty box on my PowerPoint screen. Speeded listening is an activity which gives immediate verbatim repetition. And that simply means you listen to something, and then if you're listening to it on a cell phone or on a computer where you can adjust the speed of your listening, then you make it a little bit faster and you listen to it again, and then you make it a little bit faster and you listen to it again. And so you listen to the same material 2 or 3 times, each time increasing the speed that you listen to. You can do this for written material and you can do it for spoken material, but for listening, when you listen on YouTube, for example, there's a place where you can go and alter the speed with which you listen to something. So speeded listening is a good listening activity to get verbatim repetition. Another kind of activity for listening is what we call unexploded dictation. In unexploded dictation, the learner listens to a recorded paragraph, usually about 100 words long. And the job of the learner is to make a written copy of that paragraph. So that means the learner has to replay the material, writing down what they hear and checking it and so on. And so you get a lot of immediate verbatim repetition by having an unexploded dictation. Unexploded means the dictation is not broken up into phrases as it usually is in the traditional dictation, but is just a continuous normal text. Another activity for immediate verbatim repetition is one of my favorite fluency activities, and that's the 4-3-2 activity. And this activity was actually invented by somebody who taught in Thailand, a man called Keith Morris. Keith invented the 5-4-3 activity. But in these times of recession and deflation, then we've changed it from 5-4-3 to 4-3-2. And what happens is the learners work in pairs, and the teacher chooses a topic that is very easy and familiar for the learners. It can be a topic that they've dealt with in their texts before, or it's a topic that they know a lot about. And then one learner sits and listens in each pair and the other learner talks. And the learner who talks has got 4 minutes to deliver their talk. And when 4 minutes are up, the teacher measures the time exactly and then says, good, stop, change partners. Everyone who is A moves to a new partner and B stay where they are, and they get a new speaker coming to them. The teacher says, go. And then now the speaker has to deliver the same talk to the new partner, but has only 3 minutes to do it. And this carries on, and then they move to a new partner, and then the speaker has 2 minutes to give the same talk. So the 4-3-2 activity involves half of the class being speakers, half being listeners, and each speaker delivers their talk 3 times to 3 different partners for 4 minutes, 3 minutes, and then 2 minutes. So you can see that this is immediate verbatim repetition, because they shouldn't change the talk that they're giving. They can make corrections if they want to, but they have to keep the content the same. And so they're giving exactly the same talk, but they have less and less time to do it. Another activity for speaking is a very amusing activity called headlines. And headlines don't refer to the lines going across my head here. Headlines refer to the headings in the newspaper. And so each learner in the class has to think of a very interesting thing that happened to them. It can be funny, it can be exciting, it can be whatever, but something that will interest the listener. And then they think of a headline for the activity, and they write that headline on the piece of paper using a marker pen, so it's a big, bold headline. Now, for me, if I was giving a talk, if I was one of the speakers, my headline would be, "Burning Bed Brings Pleasure," because a very interesting thing happened where we had a visitor and his bed caught alight because he didn't turn off the electric blanket and so on. And it was a very interesting and amusing story. And so I would write my headline, "Burning Bed Brings Pleasure." And so half of the class then hold up their headline in front of them, and the rest of the class people walk around looking at their headlines. And when they see a headline which is interesting, they say, "Tell me your story." And the person has to tell them the story. And when they've heard that story, they move on to someone else and say, "Tell me your story." So during the activity, the learners holding their headlines will have to tell their story 3 or 4 times within the same session. So you can see that this is, once again, immediate verbatim repetition. There's speaking activities. Other speaking activities are the best recording. The best recording is where the learner chooses a text, either a text they've written or prepared or some other text, and they try to make their best audio recording of that text. And they listen to their recording and think, "No, I can do a bit better than that." And then they try again, and then they try again until they think that they've got the best recording that they can make. Repeated reading is a immediate verbatim repetition activity where the learners read the same text aloud 3 times. And each time they try to read it a bit faster. And then there's rewriting activities. If you're a learner preparing for an exam in English and you know that you have to write in English and you have a rough idea of what your answer might be to a question that you predict in the exam, it's very good to practice writing your answer, trying to fit it within the time which is allowed for answering. And so you might write the same thing 3 times, but each time trying to write it faster and getting rid of error while you write. So you can see then that there are immediate verbatim repetition activities across the 4 skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. If we look at delayed repetition activities, which are verbatim activities, these are simply re-listening, speaking again, rereading, rewriting, just doing the same activity again, but doing it a week later or 2 weeks later or something like that. About 1/3 of the time in a language course should be spent going back to old material that has been met before and repeating that old material. Some of that going back can involve delayed verbatim repetition. So now let's look at varied repetition. There's a very nice procedure called the pyramid procedure. It's called the pyramid procedure because it's the shape of an upside down pyramid. And what happens is that there is some task that learners have to do. It may be a speaking activity such as ranking or some other closed test activity or something like that. And they do it by themselves. They do it individually. Then having done it individually, they form pairs. And in pairs, they check what they've done and do it again to get it really correct. And then they form, two pairs get together to form a group of four. So the class then forms into a group of fours, and then they go through the same activity again. And then finally they do it as a whole class activity, and by that time they're really good at doing that activity. The linked skills activity is one of my favorite teaching activities. Linked skills activities involve immediate varied repetition if you do the linked skill activity within one lesson. And so what happens in a linked skills activity, the learners might read a text, and then they talk about the text, and then they write about the text. And so there are many combinations of the four skills to make these three steps of the linked skills activity. For example, if you want to put writing first, you could write down ideas about a topic that the teacher has given to the class. And then you can go to the next step of the linked skills activity and do speaking. And so you can talk to somebody about the ideas that they've written down and share those ideas with each other. And then the third step of the linked skills activity would be to write about the ideas that you've written down and talked about. And your writing should now be quite good because you have a very good level of control of the content of the writing. The linked skills activity is a very flexible and very useful activity because it gets lots of repetition, because you focus on exactly the same material 3 times, each time using a different one of the 4 language skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. If you want to learn more about the linked skills activity, then you can go to my website or to the resources page of my school, the LALS, L-A-L-S, and there is a book, a free book called What Should Every ESL Teacher Know? Be careful, because there's also a book called What Should Every EFL Teacher Know? But there's a whole chapter in the ESL book about linked skills activities, how to make them, and the value of using such activities. It's quite easy to get good at making linked skills activities, and they're excellent for vocabulary learning because they provide large amounts of varied repetition. The repetition is varied because each repetition occurs in a different skill, because there are 3 skills where the same material is focused on. Discuss and report is another kind of varied repetition activity involving repetition. Learners get together in groups and discuss some particular topic that's been set for their discussion. And then having done that, they then report back to the rest of the class on the results of their discussion. Now you can see that the discussion and the reporting of the discussion will make use of the same vocabulary, and so you get repetition occurring in that activity. Because reporting back is a different genre from discussion, then it's likely that the vocabulary will be occurring in different contexts in the reporting than it did in the discussion. And so this then means that when you do this activity, you're more likely to get varied repetition than verbatim repetition. We know from research that varied repetition results in better retention of language than verbatim repetition, but both are important. Another activity involving varied repetition is to make a mind map with the teacher. The teacher chooses some topic, or the class chooses some topic, and then they suggest ideas that the teacher writes up on a mind map on the whiteboard or on whatever technology you're using. And having done that, then the learners then use those ideas as a basis for their writing. So you can see that there are in these varied repetition activities, there are several steps. In the link skills activity, there's 3 steps. In the discuss and report activity, there are 2 steps. In the mind map and write activity, there are 2 steps. And each step involves some different way of coming at the same topic again. Pre-teaching and listening. So the teacher does some pre-teaching before the listening activity, and then the learners listen. Pre-teaching actually isn't a very good way of teaching vocabulary, unfortunately. The research shows that pre-teaching doesn't really result in very strong knowledge of vocabulary unless you spend a reasonable amount of time on each word. And even with activities where vocabulary is directly taught and taught for some period of time, you're lucky if you get 50% retention after the teacher. I'm not a great fan of vocabulary teaching. I'm more in favor of the learners actually deliberately learning vocabulary and the teacher organizing activities which help the learning of vocabulary than the teacher getting up and teaching vocabulary. Sometimes teaching vocabulary helps. It solves a problem and allows you to move on with the lesson. But as a way of learning vocabulary, it's rather inefficient and largely ineffective. Okay, so now let's look at some delayed repetition activities where there is varied repetition. You can vary across group size. So that means you can do an activity and then come back, do it individually, and then a week later, come back and do the activity in a pair. Or you can do it the other way around. You do an activity in pairs in the classroom, and then a week later you come back and you do the activity just as an individual. Because group dynamics and talking with each other will change the use of the vocabulary in the activity, this fits into the varied repetition category. Recalling through a different skill, so recalling through writing or recalling through reading, speaking, is a way then of getting varied repetition after something has been taught or met in previous lessons. So there are many ways of providing varied repetition in a course. And teachers should look at the things which are really important in their course and plan repetition into the course itself. So that means you say, well, we did this activity in a lesson a week ago. Now, how can I come back to that same material 2 or 3 times at different times so that we go over it again, but providing some variation on what we did before? Repetition is very, very important for learning. And it's important that the repetition is not accidental, but it occurs as a result of the teacher planning opportunities for repetition to occur. Immediate repetition typically occurs through the design of a particular activity. Delayed repetition typically occurs through the teacher planning opportunities to go back to what was met before. Now, I've set a task here. The good news is that you don't have to do this task. But the reason for setting the task is to show you the goal of what I've been talking about with the repetition. So the task is you want your learners to listen to the same 5-minute talk 4 times, not necessarily within the same lesson. Now, listen to the same 5-minute talk I've written in italics because you can replace that with a description of all sorts of other activities. How will you organize this to make it remain interesting for the learners? Be prepared to explain the challenges and support you provide to keep the task interesting and manageable for other learners. So as a teacher, this is really the goal of what I've just been talking about. You should be able to say, this piece of material we've been working on has important vocabulary for the learners. It's got important language features that we want them to come back to. How am I going to make a little mini syllabus so that I come back to the same material 4 times, providing an opportunity for some immediate repetition, maybe some verbatim repetition, but certainly providing opportunities for delayed, varied repetition. Okay. Repetition can become boring. So if you do the same thing over and over again, it gets boring. And usually you can get away with 2, maybe 3 verbatim repetitions before it gets really boring. So part of the way in which you can make an activity interesting is by adding a new challenge to each repetition. A very common challenge is the challenge of speed. So you do it once, and then you say, yeah, but can you do it again, but do it faster this time? And so this challenge of speed then keeps the next repetition interesting for the learner. There are other challenges that you can add. You can add a challenge of memory. A challenge of memory means you might read something aloud, and then the teacher might provide a version which has some words missing. And then you have to read it aloud again, filling in the missing words from memory. And there's a really good activity I quite enjoy where you get the learners to listen to a poem. And you say to them, I will only say this poem once. And after I have said it once, you must repeat it to me exactly as I said it. And the learners say, oh, too difficult, can't do that. But anyway, so what the teacher does, the teacher then says the poem. And the poem can be about 8 lines long, something like that. One of my favorites is the poem Sand Dunes by Robert Frost. But there's also another good poem called The Wind. And these poems use language in ways which are grammatically accurate for normal prose. A lot of poetry plays around with the grammar and things like that, but these poems are quite good because they just use ordinary language. And so the teacher says the poem to the class and then says, now, what was the first word? And somebody usually remembers what the first word was. And so the teacher said, good. Okay, oh, you got the first 2 words, the wind. Yes, good. Now, what's the next word? And if people can't remember the next word in the poem, the teacher might give them a clue, like how many letters or what does it begin with. And if nobody remembers, usually someone does, but if nobody remembers, the teacher pretends that someone at the back of the class has said it and say, stood? Yes, that's exactly correct. Stood. Everyone looks around to see who was so clever. Actually, no one did it. But you do that, and then each time a new word or 2 is added to the poem, to the memory of the poem, the teacher repeats that part again. And so by the time the learners reach the end of their reconstruction of the poem, they've actually heard the teacher say it about 20 or more times. So in some ways, it's a kind of trick, because by having the challenge of memory and getting the learners to try and recall the words that they heard, and the teacher repeating each time, you get a complete line and a complete couple of lines or something like that. They actually listen to the poem many times, but with very high motivation. So memory can be a challenge too. In the 4-3-2 activity, where learners talk to a different listener each time, then you have the challenge of a new audience. It's a bit like telling a joke. No point in telling the joke to the same person 3 times. But people are quite happy to tell the same joke to 3 different people. So the change of audience is also a good challenge which allows repetition to occur. And then there is the challenge of decreasing support. There's an interesting activity which is a bit like the poem one in a way, but almost backwards from it. And that is the teacher writes a paragraph on the whiteboard and then gets one learner to read it aloud. And then the teacher rubs out some of the words. And if the learners have trouble with articles, for example, the teacher might rub out all of the articles "the." And then someone else has to read the poem aloud. And after they've read aloud, the teacher rubs out a few more words. And gradually then, the text on the paragraph on the whiteboard gradually disappears after each repetition. And so by the end of the session, the learners are actually reading the whole paragraph aloud, looking at the whiteboard where there is nothing written on the whiteboard. So this is, once again, a challenge of support. It's relying on memory, but it's decreasing the amount of support that the learners get by looking at the written form. So there are many techniques that you can use to make repetition interesting. But it's really important that teachers see the importance of repetition. And it's important that teachers see the importance not only of immediate repetition, but also delayed repetition. And it's also important that teachers realize that varied repetition is much more effective than verbatim repetition. Both are good, but you have to make sure that there's also opportunities for varied repetition. So that's repetition. Repetition has other effects besides increasing the strength of memory for vocabulary. It increases fluency. So by doing repeated activities, learners increase their fluency. And by increasing their fluency, they tend to restructure their knowledge of the language, because when you get faster and faster at reading or at saying something, you can't then do it word by word. You then have to do it phrase by phrase to keep the speed up. And so repetition not only affects fluency, but it also affects the size of the unit that we use when we work with language. So that's repetition. So now let's move on to the second important thing that's really important for vocabulary learning, and that is the quality of meeting with vocabulary. There are two major categories here that you can see in the table. One is incidental attention, and the other is deliberate attention. Both kinds of attention are very important in the language course. Incidental attention occurs when the learners meet something, meet new words, for example, or meet words they've met before, but their goal is not to meet the words. Their goal is either to understand the passage or to answer some question or to find the solution to a problem or something like that. So it's not their main focus of learning. Ideally, in a language course, most learning should be occurring through incidental attention, but we'll come back to that later. Deliberate attention means deliberately focusing on vocabulary. And giving deliberate attention to vocabulary is a very effective way of increasing vocabulary knowledge. For many years, it has not been fashionable for learners to deliberately study vocabulary using flashcards or word cards or things like that. But the research shows very clearly that if you do deliberate study of vocabulary using flashcards or word cards, you learn a lot in a very short time, and that knowledge stays with you. And also, we know that that knowledge is the kind of knowledge that you need for normal language use. Now, we have the two kinds of attention then, incidental attention and deliberate attention. And we can then also classify quality of processing according to the depth or the, how would we say, the richness of meetings that occur. At the most superficial level, we have noticing. And noticing simply means seeing something, giving it some attention. When learners guess a word from context, then that's an example of noticing occurring. In terms of deliberate attention, when learners make word cards or look up a word in the dictionary or a glossary, or when teachers teach them words, this is an example of the level of noticing. The second and deeper level of quality of meeting is retrieval. And retrieval can only occur with things that have been met before. When we do reading and when we do listening, and we come across vocabulary in that reading or listening that we've met before, we need to retrieve the meaning of those words as we listen and read. And this is an example of receptive retrieval. Productive retrieval means if we do speaking or writing, we have to say something, and then we know the meaning we want to express, and then we have to bring back the word form, spoken or written, that we need to express that word. When learners study using word cards, the first time they make their cards, that's noticing. But when they go through the pack of cards, looking at the word on one side, and then trying to recall the translation on the other side of the cards, then that's doing retrieval. If they are looking at the word and recalling the translation, then that's receptive retrieval with deliberate attention. When they turn their cards over and look at the first language word and then try to retrieve the second language, the English word that they were trying to learn, then that's called productive retrieval, because they're going from the meaning to the word form. And when learners use word cards or flashcard programs, it's good to start using receptive retrieval, and when you get quite good, then start doing productive retrieval with those cards. Spaced retrieval is one of the most important principles of learning that is well supported by research. If you want to learn something and remember it, do spaced retrieval. So that is, give it some attention, work out what should go with what and so on, and then sometime later, maybe an hour later, a day later, come back and do retrieval again. Look at the form, try to recall the meaning. And then a couple of days later, come back and do it again. And spaced retrieval results in far more stable, long-term learning than immediate retrieval. If we go down our quality of processing column again, we have varied meetings or use, varied meetings or varied use. And that simply means, for incidental attention, meeting a previously met word in a new form or context. We've done studies of graded readers and of novels, tracking words through those books to see each time the word occurs again, does it occur in a different context? And almost every time, when words occur again throughout a reading text, they occur in different contexts. And so these different contexts can be the word has a different form, that is, it's plural rather than singular, or it's past tense rather than present tense, or it might have a derivational affix attached to it, or it might be in a new collocation or a different collocation from how it was met before. The grammar of it could be different. All of these things result in varied meetings. And in reading, each meeting with a word is typically a varied meeting compared with the previous meetings in that piece of reading. So reading and extensive reading is an excellent way of learning vocabulary because it provides the opportunity to learn through incidental attention through varied meetings with the word. And that's why vocab learning from extensive reading works, because there is the opportunity for repeated, varied meetings. A deeper condition, and probably the deepest condition, is the condition of elaboration. Elaboration means using the word in a very rich way, or in some way analyzing or enriching the word by making new attachments to it. I think that when we use language in a meaningful way, we are actually elaborating on the knowledge of that word. I remember I went to Spain once, and before going to Spain, I decided I would learn the Spanish survival vocabulary. Many years ago, David Crabb and I did some research to create a survival vocabulary for foreign languages. The reason was this. I was going to Finland and I thought, well, I'll be teaching in a Swedish-speaking university. I'll be teaching in English, but it would be good to learn some Swedish. So I went down to the language laboratory and said, have you got any courses in Swedish? And they said, yep, we got, this one here. And I said, oh, good. So I sat down, and after 3 hours, I reached the first useful sentence. And the first useful sentence I reached was, var liggen toaletten? And var liggen toaletten means, where lies the toilet? Where is the toilet? Now you imagine, you want to go to the toilet, and you've got to wait 3 hours before you can ask somebody where the toilet is. You're in deep trouble. So it was clear that the language course for studying Swedish bore no relationship to what I really needed for using the language. So we created a survival vocabulary. We did some research. We went around and interviewed people who had begun to learn another language where they were in situations that you needed and you learned. And we came up with a list of 120 words and phrases, which are really useful if you're beginning to learn another language. If you're interested in this, you can go to my website, and there's a link to the Lal's resources page where the survival vocabulary has been translated into, I think, about 20 different languages. I think there's an Indonesian survival vocabulary, a Thai survival vocabulary, French, Greek, German, and so on. And within the space of about 2 or 3 hours, using spaced retrieval and using word cards, you can actually learn this vocabulary. I learnt the Greek survival vocabulary while flying from Finland to Athens on the aeroplane. There was a Greek man sitting to me, and he had his seatbelt on and he couldn't escape. And I got him to help me with the pronunciation of some of the words, which I wasn't sure about. But when we landed in Athens, I could bargain for a taxi. I could tell the taxi to go to the hotel that we wanted to go to. I could go out into the market and buy food using Greek. And I could be nice and polite to people and thank them, or do all of these things just using this very useful survival vocabulary. Now, when I went to Spain, I decided I'd use the Spanish survival vocabulary. And so I worked away at learning it. And one of the phrases I still remember is the phrase for directing a taxi. Because part of the survival vocabulary is giving directions and understanding directions when you're trying to go somewhere. And we were we'd been off, a group of us who were speakers had been off, and we'd had a bit of a tour, and we came back and we were looking for the building in the university where we had to meet up with the conference again. And I happened to see it through the window, and so in Spanish, I said, "Pare aquí," which means stop here. Now I can still remember where I was sitting. I was sitting in the front of the taxi with the driver. I can remember the direction in which the building was. For me, this was a really meaningful use of the language. And I think that very meaningful uses of the language create the condition of elaboration, which provides lots of associations with those words. Elaboration and deliberate attention. For the deliberate learning of vocabulary, using the keyword technique is a way of elaborating and making vocabulary stick in your mind. Some words don't stick. You try to learn them and they disappear, and then you try again and they disappear. And for those words, you need to use some kind of memory trick like the keyword technique. I haven't got time to explain it here, but you can look it up on the web. It's a very useful technique. Semantic mapping, where the teacher and the learners explore various associations with a word, how it can be used, its collocations and its various senses and its core meaning and so on. Word part analysis is a particularly good way of helping words stick in memory. That is, breaking words into prefix, suffix, stem, and using the meaning of the parts to help recall the meaning of the whole. So we can see then that we have these deepening conditions of noticing, retrieval, varied meetings of use, and elaboration. And you could sort of draw an arrow across from the top left-hand corner of the square where I've got my various conditions listed to the bottom right-hand corner. And that would actually show that if you want to get the most effective way of learning, you should be aiming for deliberate elaboration. But all of these kinds of conditions of learning are important because you can't learn everything at the most intense and the detail level. You've got to take the opportunities that come. But as we go down the chart and as we go across the chart, the conditions for learning improve. So now then, we've looked at the two important conditions which are essential for vocabulary learning: repetition and quality of meetings with the words. The next step is to say, well, how do we put these things into practice within a syllabus? So now I want to look at recommendations for a language course which would increase the opportunities for repetition and increase the opportunities for deep quality of processing. So we have 8 different suggestions, and I'll go through them. There is a handout for this course, which I think might have been distributed to you. If it hasn't, I'm sure the organisers will put it up somewhere where you can download. So there's no reason to be scrambling to copy these PowerPoint slides. It's all on a 2-page handout that you can get. The first recommendation is control the levels of vocabulary in the course to match the learner's current level and needs. It's really important for vocabulary learning that teachers know how many words their learners know, and they know whether the material that they're working on now is suitable for their level of knowledge. It's now very easy to find out how many words your learners know. If you go to my website, there's a link to the updated vocabulary levels test and the new vocabulary levels test, which test learners at the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 word levels. You can choose levels. You don't have to give all of the levels in the test to your learners. If your learners are low proficiency learners, you might just test the first 1,000 or second 1,000. If your learners are intermediate, you might decide to not bother testing the first 1,000 and just test the second, third, and 4,000 or something like that. You can choose the levels. But these tests provide very useful feedback about how many words your learners know. And it's important that when you're running your course, it's important that they're reading graded readers which are at the right level for them, and that they're having the opportunity to listen to material which is at the right level for them. Okay, recommendation number 2. Build a repetition schedule into your course. We looked at the task earlier of trying to come back to the same piece of material 4 or 5 times in either verbatim or varied repetition, but certainly with a mixture of immediate and delayed repetition. You should look at your course with this in mind. How can you go back to the old material so that it now has a chance to be repeated and thus get closer to being learnt and retained? You might say, oh, there's so much material to cover in my course that if I keep going back to the old material, I'm not going to be able to cover the new material. My advice would be, go over the new material quickly and use the time you save to go back to the old material. The new material of today's lesson will become the old material of tomorrow's lesson. And so the learners will have a chance to meet it again. The first meeting with a piece of material or first meeting with words are not very important. They're not very important because they're only the first step in actually knowing those words. The most important repetitions for words are when the words get close to being permanently retained and remembered by the learners. So the new material is not terribly important. You can deal with it because once having dealt with it, you provide opportunities for retrieval and varied retrieval later. But it's not something that should be dwelt on. Learners don't learn something by meeting it once. They learn something by meeting it many times. And so the first meeting is not that important. Do it quickly and spend time on the old material. Being an old person, I think that old things are more important than young and new things. So it's the same with repetition. Old material is much more important than young or new material. Run a substantial, well-monitored extensive reading program and an extensive listening program. Extensive reading is very important. In my opinion, if you want to make an improvement to your language course, which will have the most effect for the least effort, then you should introduce and run an extensive reading program. The research shows very clearly that the effects of introducing an extensive reading program and running it regularly for the learners is very strong. And there are other things you could do to improve your course, but this is the one which will have the greatest effect on learning. You should find out, if you don't know about extensive reading, you should Google it and find out what extensive reading is. Go to the Extensive Reading Foundation website. There are lots of very useful resources there. There's a book which tells you, a free booklet, which tells you how to set up an extensive reading program. And there are many sources of reading material that you can use. I know that in countries like Thailand and Indonesia and Philippines, it's not difficult to find graded readers which are useful for including in an extensive reading program. But this is very, very important. And it's something a teacher should really look into and learn how to do. It will make an enormous change to your learners' language proficiency. Extensive listening is also important, but it's really hard to control the level of listening material, because to get really good listening material, you really need to have learners getting input which is at the right level for them. It's quite easy to do that for reading material, but it's a bit harder to do it for listening material. But there are many ways of setting up extensive listening programs. Okay, recommendation number 4. Use theme-based learning and activities that give repeated attention to the same topic across different skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Theme-based learning means choosing a topic and then working on that topic for several weeks. I'm very much in favor of content-based instruction. I think content-based instruction provides very good conditions for vocabulary learning because it provides opportunity for the same vocabulary to occur again and again, and therefore you get the opportunity for repetition to occur. Unfortunately, in course books tend to have a different reading text and a different topic for each lesson, which introduces new vocabulary and doesn't bring back the vocabulary from previous lessons. That's why it's important to build repetition schedules into a course so you get that repetition. But if you have some control over what material you work with, it's really good to work with themes, because the theme allows you to keep coming back to the same content and vocabulary and language features again and again and still keep it interesting. Recommendation number 5. Train learners in strategy use and understanding of how to learn, including principles of learning. I think this is important even for very young learners. You can teach young learners the importance of spacing repetitions. You can teach them the importance of repetition. You can teach them ways in which they can do retrieval. And even learners as young as 5, 6, 7 years old, you can show them simple little activities which make them have to think about what's there instead of just seeing what's there. That is, they have to do a retrieval rather than just looking at what's there. Learners should take control of their own learning. And to do this, they need to know useful strategies and they need to understand the really important principles behind language learning. The important principles of learning are things like do repetition, make sure that you try to increase the quality of the repetitions that you do by doing retrieval and elaboration and varied retrieval. Spend time on task. If you want to learn to read, do a lot of reading. If you want to learn to write, do a lot of writing. If you want to learn to speak, do a lot of speaking. And so principles like this are really important. And they're very simple, but learners should understand principles. They shouldn't be something that teachers keep for themselves. They should be something that teachers give to learners. For vocabulary learning, there are very important strategies like the strategy of guessing from context. Learners should get some training in how to guess from context and get plenty of practice in doing it. They should learn the importance of using the strategy of word cards. They should know which is a good flashcard program to download onto their cell phone and use this program to help their learning. They should know the importance, of course, of coming back when doing word card learning and doing spaced retrieval. The strategy of word parts is very important. There are lists of the most important word parts and the most valuable ones for learners to learn. If you want to find an article about this, go to my website, and there's an article by Wei, W-E-I, and Nathan. I can't remember the dates, probably about 2014 or something like that, where there's a list of the most useful stems for learners of English. And learners should learn the most useful prefixes and affixes and stems. It's not a very large list. It's a list probably that wouldn't be more than about 30 or 40 items altogether. But if learners know these really important word parts, then they can apply word part analysis to their vocab learning, and they can also use it when they try to figure out what a word might mean. A while back, I fell down and I hurt my shoulder, and so I went to the physiotherapist to get some physiotherapy to try and get my shoulder working. And while I was there, I found that the physiotherapist was actually a good friend of my nephew. And we got talking about lots of things and got very friendly and so on. And he told me how he became a physiotherapist. He was working in the post office. And when he was working in the post office, he had to attend some training courses because he was a telephone technician. And in one of these training courses, the teacher gave them some things to learn, but also said, look, here's a list of ways in which you can help, which will help you to learn these things you need to know. And the teacher showed them 2 or 3 fairly simple techniques. They weren't actually very good techniques, but they were okay. They were things like, write it on a Post-it note and stick it on your refrigerator and stick another one in front of your toilet, all of that, so you have a chance to see them again. I mean, I could have given him half a dozen much better techniques than that, but still, the trainer not only told them what to learn, but showed them how to go about learning it. And so he did that, and he found he did really well. And so he said, when I was at secondary school, I thought I was really dumb because I didn't do well at school. But now that I know how to learn, then he then decided that he would then go and do a university degree. And he did a degree in physiotherapy and is now a very well-known physiotherapist in New Zealand. And this was the result of a teacher not only teaching, but showing him how to learn and explaining some basic principles of learning. And I think that teachers have this really important job of not only teaching, but also training learners in how to learn. So that's why number 5 is very important. And those strategies and principles involve repetition, deliberate attention, spacing the repetitions, elaborating, doing retrieval, and so on, that we've looked at already. Okay. Recommendation number 6. Have a strong fluency component in your course. For those of you who have heard me talk before, you know that I'm a bit of a fanatic about the 4 strands. The 4 strands are the strands of meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, language-focused learning, and fluency development. And I think that when you're organizing learning, you should try and have a balance of these 4 kinds of learning in your course, roughly equal time for each of the 4 strands. And the fluency development strand is one of the strands of a course. And fluency development means working with material you already know, but getting faster and faster at using that material, either through reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And some of the techniques we looked at the beginning when we're looking at immediate repetition are very good techniques for developing fluency as well. These are things like 4-3-2 and let me look back to the speeded listening and headlines and the best recording, those sorts of activities. These are also very good for developing fluency activities. And fluency activities are good because they allow the learners to deal with large quantities of material in a rather short time. If you do a speed reading course, you can increase your reading speed by 50% or more just as a result of doing 20 speed reading texts. You can find speed reading text quite easily on our websites. Just search for Sonia Millett, SONIA MILLETT, and Sonia Millett's material for speed reading courses at the 500, 1000, 2000, 3000, 2000 plus academic word list level are all free, and you can download them and run a speed reading course with your learners. Speed reading and fluency development activities involve repetition, but they also make learners capable of getting much more input within the same amount of time. And much more input means more opportunity for repetition, more opportunity for varied meetings and varied use. Principle number 7. Do some deliberate learning of vocabulary. Learners should learn using word cards or a flashcard program. There are very good flashcard programs around nowadays, but when learners learn them, use those programs, they should be aware of the principles which should lie behind their use. And that is the principles of repetition, retrieval, spacing, deliberate attention, which all help the learning of vocabulary. If a learner is informed about why they're doing something and how they can do it to help learning, then this makes their learning from it much, much better. So deliberate learning of vocabulary is a useful part of a vocabulary learning program. And then we have number 8, the last one. Give deliberate and systematic attention to word building, prefixes, suffixes, stems, and the analysis and interpretation of multi-word units. Multi-word units are a bit like complex words. The parts usually relate in some way to the meaning of the whole, and being able to relate the parts to the meaning of the whole certainly helps them stick in learners' memory. So we've now looked at the 2 really important principles of repetition and quality of mental processing. We've looked at how repetition can be immediate or delayed, and it can be verbatim or varied. And it's good to have a mixture of these different kinds of repetition. Don't make it all immediate verbatim repetition. It's really important that there are opportunities for delayed verbatim repetition and delayed varied repetition. We've looked at the quality of processing of words when they are met, and the important distinction between incidental learning and deliberate learning, and also the deepening conditions of noticing, of retrieval, of varied retrieval, and also of elaboration. Whenever teachers use teaching activities, they should have in the back of their minds some understanding of how that activity is putting important learning principles into practice. I think that's enough. Thank you for your patience, and I'm happy to answer any easy questions that you like to ask.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Paul Nation. All right, it's time for Q&A session. Okay, number 1. All right. What is your stance on using direct translation to assist vocabulary learning?
All in favor of it. The research shows very clearly that if you want to convey the meaning of a word to a learner, using their first language is the most effective way of conveying the meaning of a word to a learner. There's been comparisons with pictures and monolingual definitions and so on. Translation wins every time. And the reason translation wins every time is because there are no barriers to understanding a translation, as long as it's reasonably accurate. And it relates immediately to knowledge that the learners already have, the knowledge of their first language. So it's not surprising that translation wins every time. There's also evidence that when we begin to learn another language, in the early stages of learning, which could last quite a long time, the vocabulary store of the first language and the second language are actually shared. They share the same vocabulary store. And it's only at very high levels of proficiency that learners end up with separate vocabulary stores. So even if you don't use translation, learners are going to associate a word with its first language translation if they can. So I'm all in favor of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so another question. It's great to know about how useful repetition is. However, she's worried about the perhaps the high achiever might think that it is too boring. How should we maintain the positive vibes in their repetition task?
Yep. Well, this of course argues for individualizing learning wherever possible, because no matter how carefully you try to choose the learners to go into a class to be of the same proficiency level, it never ends up that way. Actually, when I was teaching in Thailand, it was very interesting because we used to have an entry test for learners, and you would have learners who had the same score on the entry test going into a class. And within a week, the teacher knew one learner is going to achieve far much more than the other. And part of the reason was that some learners had reached that level on the entry test through a lot of opportunity and all sorts of things, and other learners had reached that level with very little opportunity to learn. And the learners who had little opportunity, when they were given more opportunity to learn, they shot ahead. So you really need to try and set your tasks so that it takes account of each learner. I think that's not so difficult. The way you would do it would, for example, in pair activities, would be to give the more proficient learner a more demanding task in a pair activity, working on the same material. Or you could have the learners who are more proficient becoming producers of the input for the learners who are less proficient, and so on. It's not too hard to sit down and think about those things. If you want a bit more detail about this, there's a book I've written called What Should Every EFL Learner Know? Be important to remember the F, yeah, because I wrote one with ESL and they always get mixed up. But and I'm not trying to make money by recommending this book, because they paid me in advance for this book, and I'm never going to get any more money for it. And it sells very cheaply for about $15 on Amazon. But I tried to write in that book the things that I thought that every EFL teacher should know. I've been training teachers of English and teaching English for over 50 years. And I thought, if I can't sit down and give good advice to a new language teacher, then I've been wasting my time. So I did sit down. Well, I didn't sit down, I lie down, because when I do my writing in bed. So I lay down and I wrote that book. I actually wrote the book in Thailand, in Chiang Mai, most of it. So, well, I was supposed to be on holiday, but that's my idea of a holiday. And in that book, there are lots of suggestions for dealing with learners of different proficiency and dealing with large classes and things like that. So I recommend, the price of the book is cheap, and that was one of the conditions I gave it to the publisher. I said, look, I want a price so that English teachers who don't have a lot of income, English teachers are poor people usually, then they can afford to easily buy this book. And so he did that. I have hopes in the future that it will be even cheaper, but that deal hasn't been quite worked out yet.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Professor Paul. Okay, the next question is dealing with the collocation. How do we learn collocation in the easier way? Do you treat it as similar to vocabulary?
Yes. Collocation, okay. Collocation is a big, big topic, but the basic principle is this. Collocations are, I call them multi-word units, simply because collocation has so many different meanings from different people that it's often difficult to know what you're talking about. Collocations are made up of separate words. For most of the collocations of English, the meaning of the parts relate to the meaning of the whole. And so that means that when you learn a collocation, for most collocations, you should be looking at the individual meaning of the words and then seeing how do these words go together to make the meaning of the collocation. So that's an example of elaboration on that scale of the level of processing that we looked at earlier. So I think that's a very important condition for learning collocation. And there's a small number of collocations, less than 100 in English, which are true idioms. And true idioms means, or core idioms, we called it in the research, the meaning of the parts doesn't tell you anything about the meaning of the whole.
Right.
And this is usually because somehow the connection between the meaning of the parts and the meaning of the whole has been lost in the history of the language. Some examples of these true core idioms are things like as well as, because you can know as, you can know well, you can know as, but it doesn't tell you the meaning of as well as. Cats and dogs, I suppose, in the phrase raining cats and dogs, we have no idea where that comes from. There's lots of theories about dead dogs and dead cats being thrown up on the roof, and when it rained, they got washed down, you know, and that sort of thing. But that's all made up etymology and so on. But there's less than 100 of true core idioms. All other multi-word units have some relationship between the meaning of the parts and the meaning of the whole. And so learners should be looking at that from that perspective. There's some multi-word units or collocations where there's some extra meaning which is added because of, partly because it's sort of, the collocation has taken on a bit of a meaning of its own. You know, if you say something like last night, you could argue that last night doesn't mean the last night. It just means the night before today, you know. And so there's a little bit of extra meaning to be learnt there, but it still helps to know what last means and what night means. It's no accident that last night uses the words last and night. It uses them because they contribute to the meaning of the whole. And so for the vast majority of collocations, learners should be looking at the parts. If there's something a little bit extra, then good, learn that. But looking at the parts will help the learning.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So next question, could you share your top 5 language learning strategies to share with students?
Yep, no problem at all. This is language learning strategies, I guess.
Yes.
Not vocabulary learning strategies. Okay. I guess I would put my top one as learn the 6 important principles of learning. And having said that, I'm in trouble because I've got to try and remember what those 6 principles are. But the 6 principles, I'll do my best. And if I can't remember now, in 20 minutes time, it'll come back to me. And we might be able to complete the list then. I would say, make sure you do repetition. Okay. Make sure that you do retrieval. Make sure that you spend time on task so that whatever you want to learn to do, you do that a lot. You don't Steve Krashen is wrong about saying, if you just do extensive reading, you'll become good at writing. You become good at writing by doing lots of writing. So you need to spend time on task. Learning a language is not easy. Okay, and so what have we got? Gosh, I can't even remember the one I've given you now. Never mind. So have I done retrieval? If I haven't done, spacing. Yeah, spacing and retrieval, that's really important. Understand, oh yes, I'm getting terribly mixed up in this one. Become an autonomous learner, and that is take control of your own learning, take responsibility for your own learning. Teachers can't do that for you. And then I would say, learn the most useful things that you need to learn. And that means, for vocabulary, it means if you don't know the high frequency words, learn them first. If you don't know anything at all, learn the survival vocabulary first. Once you know the high frequency words, then either move on to academic words if you have academic goals, or move on to the mid-frequency words of the language. But items in a language are not of equal value. the typical language, any language feature of vocabulary, grammar, whatever, follow what's called the Zipfian curve, named after George Zipf. And it means that there are a small number of really useful items and a very large number of not so useful items. And you should be learning the very small number of really useful items first. If you want to get some written guidance on this, I've written a book called What You Need to Know to Learn a Foreign Language. And it's free, and you can get it from my website. And that's written for language learners. This has now been translated into a couple of languages. It's not yet translated into Thai or Indonesian or Japanese, which is a pity actually, but it's really hard to get people to do good translations. Translation is much more difficult than it seems to be. But this book is written for learners, trying to explain, if you want to learn another language, what should you do? And it outlines various principles and the things you should do.
Thank you very much.
It's
okay. Yeah, thank you. I think one of our team will post the link in the chat line, the chat box, so everyone can access that link that you're referring to.
Yeah, tell them to look. They're just changing my web page, and if they go to LALS, that's Linguistics and Applied Language Studies, Resources and Publications, you'll find them on that page. They're moving them from my web page to a resource site.
I see.
So that if I happen to die, which I don't intend to do, then they might exist after I'm gone. What
okay. All right, moving on to the next question. Do you think we should teach vocabulary explicitly through extensive reading, or should we just let students learn and figure it out, the words by themselves?
Well, extensive reading doesn't involve the explicit teaching of vocabulary. If you think it does, then you don't understand what extensive reading is. So my advice is go and buy a book, Nation and Wearing, teaching extensive reading in another language. It just appeared this year, and that's a very well-informed, beautifully written, excellent book that you should give to your parents for Christmas or Songkran or whatever holiday you want to give a gift to your parents. That book explains all the things behind extensive reading and so on. So extensive reading doesn't involve deliberate teaching.
Okay.
I think that vocabulary should be learnt through the 4 strands of meaning-focused input, which includes extensive reading and extensive listening, where the learners pick it up incidentally. It should also be learnt through meaning-focused output, where the learners do speaking and writing, which makes use of that vocabulary. It should be learnt through the strand of language-focused learning, where learners deliberately study and are deliberately taught vocabulary. And it should be learnt through fluency activities. So if you look in my publications for the year 2000 and it's either 6 or 7, let me just think for a minute here. I think it's 2007, I don't know. There's an article about the 4 strands which explains in detail. It's also, there's a chapter in the book, the first chapter of the book, What Should Every EFL Teacher Know, explains the 4 strands. And the 4 strands are really important because it's the answer to every question, which is like this. It says, how should we learn vocabulary? How should we learn grammar? Or how should we teach vocabulary? How should we teach grammar? How should we teach reading? How should we teach writing? The answer is always the same. Make sure that learning has a chance to occur through each of the 4 strands because they are mutually helping each other.
Great, thank you very much. So now I have another interesting questions regarding to narrow reading. So we understand that in the extensive reading, we do not teach vocabulary, but for the narrow reading to improve vocabulary knowledge for primary grade students, so little kids, can I teach vocabulary expressively through using narrow reading materials, or just let them read and do some activities after reading without teaching vocabulary directly at all?
Well, my answer would be similar to the previous answer, and that would be, it's good to do learning through If you're working with young learners, then using shared book activities are very good, because where the teacher and the learners together read a book. There's lots of research on that, and that's very good for learning vocabulary, but that's only one kind of opportunity. Teachers should not take a lot of responsibility for teaching. Learners should learn vocabulary, and they should learn how to learn vocabulary. And even young learners can work with word cards and things like that. One of my colleagues, Avril Coxhead, has a really good vocab learning activity. She makes a vocabulary box. Whenever she teaches a class, a course over a thing, she brings a little cardboard box in, which is full of blank cards. And every time a word occurs that she thinks it's worth the learners learning, that word is written on the card, its meaning written on the back, and it goes into the box. And for a few minutes each week, the learners take some cards from the box and test each other on the words. Now, she says that at the end of her course, somebody usually steals the box. And that shows that the activity is probably a real good activity, which is valued by learners. So this is a very simple way of making sure that vocabulary which occurs in some activities also has an opportunity to occur, in deliberate learning. So you need to balance the kind of opportunities for learning. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So right now, another question is focusing on strain 3, which is language focused. When we do teach students vocabulary in the text, which way is more effective teaching in terms of pre-reading, during reading, or post-reading? What do you reckon on this stage?
Well, once again, we'll put it into context. What the questioner is asking about is called intensive reading. And that means when the teachers and the learners work together on the text and do some deliberate study of it. Now, that activity fits into the language-focused learning strand of a course. The language-focused learning strand of a course should occupy 1/4 of the course time. And intensive reading should occupy about 1/4 of that quarter. Now, so we're talking about deliberate learning of vocabulary with a reading text. And so then you need to say, well, what things could we do which would use the conditions that we looked at before? Can we do elaboration, such as breaking the word into word parts? Can we do activities which look to see if there are regular or irregular spelling patterns in the word? Can we look at the word in the text and see what word it collocates with, and so on? So when you do that for intensive reading, I think you can do it pre-teaching, but the research on pre-teaching shows it's not terribly effective. There's been quite a few bits of research on that, but it doesn't yield much. My feeling is it's best to do it during the reading of the text. There can be follow-up activities, and the follow-up activities provide an opportunity for repetition. But the follow-up activity shouldn't be an opportunity to avoid doing something while the text is being read. In an intensive reading class, that's the opportunity for the teachers and the learners to work together, and the learners to ask questions about bits they don't understand, and so on. So I guess if you want an answer to that, I'd say during the text, find if the stuff worked on is important, make sure you have a repetition schedule so you come back to it again 3 or 4 times on spaced and varied repetition, and that will help the learning.
Okay, great. Another interesting question is about the new normal when we implement online digital learning and remote learning. How will the vocabulary instruction be any different or similar? What is your thought on that?
I think it makes very little difference, really. The principles of learning still apply. You can change things like distance learning and technology are sort of parts of techniques in a way. And what really matters is not the technique itself, but the way the technique applies conditions for learning. And so we just have to make sure that if we do distance learning and things like that, there are still opportunities for repetition, deliberate attention, spacing, retrieval, all of those sorts of things. I think it's a really good thing for teachers to look at the activities they do quite often and then to say, how will this activity help learning? Am I providing repetition? If not, am I providing quality of meetings? And if I'm providing quality of meetings, at what depth? Is it at the level of noticing or retrieval or varied retrieval or elaboration? Am I applying, the principle? And so learning doesn't occur through magic. Learning occurs through the conditions for learning occurring. And teachers need to look at that and see how their activities put those conditions into practice. And if they don't put good conditions into practice, how do you change that activity so that it does put good conditions into practice? If you're interested in that, there's a chapter in a book that Stuart Webb and I wrote called How Vocabulary is Learned from Oxford University Press, I think 2017. There's a whole chapter which analyzes about 20 teaching activities in this deliberate way of looking at the conditions for learning that they put into place and what to do if those conditions are not occurring.
Okay, thank you. Okay, right, next question. Could you please share opinions on the way that students using vocabulary memorizing only to improve English learning? Could you please share your recommendation? So if the students use only the memorization in vocabulary learning.
Well, I like memorization, but memorization fits into the language-focused learning strand of a course, and it's part of that strand. And so that means that those kind of memorization activities should make up less than about a 16th, one quarter of the time on a course. And so if you really want to make the most use of that, the learners should be doing a lot of reading, which makes use of the vocabulary they've been deliberately learning. They should be doing listening, which makes use of that vocabulary. They should have a chance to speak and write using it. And they should get really fluent in using that vocabulary in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So I would simply say, if you want to improve your course, one way is to look and see, in my course, am I giving a balance of the four strands or not? And if you're not, then try and change what's happening in the course to balance the four strands.
Great, thank you. All right, next question. How do you insert the eureka moment or aha moment in vocabulary learning and teaching?
Oh, okay. I'm not quite sure what eureka moment I'm thinking of there. I would hope that the eureka moment would be an understanding of the principles of learning. Because I think that eureka moments are probably come from applying really good conditions for learning. And I think if learners really understand what conditions are needed for learning, that could be their eureka moment. And the reason it could be the eureka moment is because they can then see if these conditions are working for them. And I'm sure they will find that the conditions do work for them, because we know that repetition is important, quality of processing is important, time on task is important, all these sorts of things. So these conditions are highly likely to give eureka moments.
Okay. And what is your recommendation strategy for teaching vocabulary in the ESP course?
Yeah, well, okay. I keep giving the same answer again. The word teaching vocabulary is the wrong question. The right question is, how do you arrange for the learning of vocabulary in a course, in an ESP course? And you've simply then got to say, am I providing opportunities for reading to occur, meaning focused input, so that the learners have a chance to meet this in reading, and they have a chance to meet in listening through lectures and so on? Do the learners have a chance to use this vocabulary productively in reading and writing? Because unless they actually have chances to use it, they will have difficulty in really learning those words to be able to use it. And then there's the deliberate study and learning of vocabulary. And I think that in an ESP course, there should be intensive reading where the learners and the teachers work together, and the teacher can do a little bit of vocab teaching there. But learners should know how to learn subject matter vocabulary themselves. And part of that learning, particularly for some subjects, is prefixes and suffixes and stems are very important in some subject areas, particularly where the subject area technical vocabulary comes from French, Latin, or Greek. So if you're studying botany, biology, medicine, the sciences, then there will be lots of Latin and Greek stems. And learning the most frequent of these and learning how to break the word into word parts and to see that they're made up of prefixes and suffixes is very important. And then not only that, learners should be able to read fluently and to speak fluently and to write fluently and so on in their ESP area. Because when you study at university, you have to write assignments. You've got to write answers to exams in a limited time. My experience with teaching learners of English as a foreign language is that native speakers can write 3 times as much in the same time as someone who's writing in English as a foreign language. And that's a big advantage to a native speaker. So foreign language learners of English who are studying in another country really need to become fluent in activities like writing. So I would make sure then that there's opportunities across the 4 strands in an ESP course. It's just as important as all other sorts of courses.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Another question. What's the difference between phrase and collocation?
Phrase is simply a grammatical feature. A phrase simply just means a group of words which has some grammatical coherence, I guess, because you can have verb phrases and noun phrases and adverbial phrases and all of those sorts of things. But collocations are typically words particular words which occur together reasonably often. Now, collocations can be parts of phrases. They can be phrases as well. But in the collocation, you expect there is some sort of co-occurring frequency relationship between them.
I see. Okay, and another question. Could you please suggest resources to activities for vocabulary learning for students who want to do self-study?
Yeah, well, the short answer is get that free book from my website, What Do You Need to Know to Learn a Foreign Language, because that gives you lots of advice. The reason I wrote that book is because I lived in several countries, as was mentioned at the beginning of my talk, in the very kind and generous introduction. But I remember, for example, when I was in Indonesia, I started learning Javanese. I'd learned some Indonesian. I thought it'd be good to learn Javanese. And I got a Javanese teacher. He didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to do. And if I was in the same situation now, I could make really good use of that teacher, because I now understand, what stuff I should be learning, the idea of frequent items and things like that. And I know how I should go about learning it. And I know the importance of balancing the opportunities for learning across the 4 strands. I just wish now, or then, that I knew what I know, that I knew then what I know now about how to make, the best use of these opportunities for learning. So my suggestion is go and have a look at that book, because that gives indications of how you can try and balance your opportunities for learning so that you get the kind of knowledge that you need to use a language.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Is there any other questions that anyone would like to ask? Some of the questions are duplicated questions that, you have already answered. And some ask for the recommendation for theories that we can use for the reading and vocabulary, because that person is just about to conduct the research. So I think she just needs some advice on recommended theory for her literature review.
Oh, I see. She can send me an email and I can give her some brief suggestions.
Okay, thank you. All right. Somebody said that they need to learn new language. So please give that person, or him or her, easy tip or technique for learning new languages.
Yeah. Well, my first suggestion would be, if it happens to be one of the languages where we've got the survival vocabulary, that's a good start, because that's the 120 words or phrases, and you'd be able to use them immediately you learn them, because they are so useful. That would be my starting point. And then once again, I would say, go and read the book on what should every foreign language learner know, or what do you need to know to learn a foreign language, because that gives advice on how to go about learning a new language. There's a very interesting article on my website. I can't remember the let me think of the year. Probably it's about 2013, something like that. But it's Azusa Yamamoto and Nation, or Nation and Yamamoto, and she Azusa was one of my students, and she wanted to learn Spanish, but she wanted to learn Spanish without a teacher. And so she said, how can I apply the principle of the Four Strands to the learning of Spanish without a teacher? And so she wrote an assignment. She could do this, and she searched the web for all kinds of resources. And I thought it was a terrific assignment, really good. So I said, look, let's turn this into an article, because it's so useful. And so that article is now published. And so if you want to learn another language, it'd be useful to go and see what advice she gives there, because there are now even better resources available. But the balance of activities she used were really very good, and she did well in learning Spanish.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'll take one last question, because right now we're just about to close this webinar. What is the role of culture in vocabulary learning?
Well, it has a really important role, because there are cultural words which are almost like technical words in some way, and that is, you don't really understand them fully until you understand the nature of the culture that lies behind them. And it's the same with technical vocabulary. If you're going to learn a subject such as carpentry or botany or medicine or economics, you don't learn the technical vocabulary before you learn the subject. You learn the technical vocabulary while you develop understanding of the subject. You have to learn them on the job. And I think cultural vocabulary is like that. You can't really pre-learn cultural vocabulary. You can get a rough meaning for it. But as you get better and better at the language and you understand the culture more, you can see the meaning that these words really have. So I would think the first thing is to be aware that when we first learn the meaning of words, our knowledge of the meaning is probably not as clear or exact as it could be. But we must be prepared for the fact that there is more to learn, and look out for that kind of learning. And I think that kind of learning really only occurs as a result of taking part in that culture and coming to a nature of the understanding of that culture. I mean, in Thai, for example, the word kreng chai, you can explain what it means, but until you see examples of it, you don't really know what it means. And even then, it probably takes quite a few months or years to come to an understanding of what kreng chai involves and why it exists in a way, and how it applies.
Okay, thank you very much. Like the word kreng chai in Thai will be as close as being considerate, but there's more subtle,
Much more
meaning
than that.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More than that.
This is hard to explain. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Paul, and for your comprehensive talk on this, what matters in vocabulary learnings. And here is our key takeaways from this talk. So he go over the different types of repetition activities, from verbatims and very repetitions, and also the tasks. Make sure that you challenge the task by speed and memory. And then also consider vocabulary learning conditions, whether the noticing, receptive and productive retrieval, varied meanings and use, and elaborations. And last but not least, he go over the 8 recommendations for repetition and quality of processing in the classroom. And I really like this quote. Professor Paul said, learner doesn't learn vocabulary from the first time, but many times. So thank you very much, Professor Paul Nation, for this wonderful talk and for joining this TEFL program seminar with us. Thank you, sir. Okay, and also I want to thank our attendants and who's are here to participate, and you're actively participate and enjoy this. Before you leave, we would like to ask you to complete this evaluation form. So either scan it to the QR code or with the link that you will receive, in the chat. So I think one of us already have sent this to you. So thank you again, everyone, for joining this webinar organized by TEFL Program, Faculty of Education, Chulalongkorn Universities. And let me invite you to the next session, which is on July 17, and this is the public webinar again, and the title is Input and Mind Matters on EFL Instruction from Dr. Monton from Litu Thammasat University. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for today, and I hope that we will see you next time. And if you want to visit and watch these webinars again, so please go to TEFL Chulalongkorn channels on YouTube, and this webinar will be posted there in a very short time. And thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. ขอบคุณครับ Thank you very much.
ขอบคุณค่ะอาจารย์ Nation. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
That's good. Okay. Good. I'll sign off now then, shall I?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. No, thank you for running it so well. It was very good.
Hopefully that you can join us for the next webinar. If
Yep.
you have like
Thanks for
another
that.
project. Professor Nation is always kind to our program. Thank you very much. We appreciate
Thank you.
that.
Okay. No problem. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, ka.
You can see it's nighttime here now.
Yes.
Your
Thank you very much.
okay.